It's kind of fun being on Eastern time just because you're ahead of everybody else in the States.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, by the time, if I wake up at 9 a.m., it's like in LA, it's 6 a.m. So I can just, do whatever I need to do for a few hours and nobody bothers me.
Yeah, that's exactly how I operate too. Except I'm like 9 hours behind LA. So I can get my whole day's work done. Then they get up in LA. But it's good for deadlines,
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it's interesting. I never actually really asked anyone who lives in Europe about the time difference before, in terms of just because I assume you're dealing with a lot of Americans on a day-to-day basis for what you do. Is it helpful? Is it annoying?
I would say both. I think my whole team, including management and everything, is from the US. So that whole time zone can be annoying, but it could also be a benefit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, so you're in Copenhagen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And have you been there? Is that where you were born?
Born and raised, yeah. My mom is from New York originally, but moved to Denmark when she was a teenager. So I was born and raised here. So I'm practically 100% Danish.
What kept you there? Because I assume at a certain point with a career like yours, there would be a thought to move somewhere else.
Yeah, most definitely. I've had the thought forever to move to the US to pursue music. And I almost moved to LA in 2017. But I remember some visa issues, some technical stuff ended up never working out. And I just kind of never got to move. And honestly, I don't regret it. It's probably a longer conversation, but yeah.
Hey, we got time, man. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, honestly, to hear you say you don't regret it. I feel like oftentimes people will make the big move and kind of get there, and it's not the life-altering event they were expecting.
Exactly. I've had a few friends move to LA and just feel like they don't get anywhere. I mean, music career rise, I might have gotten further if I moved to LA, but socially I would just be by myself. I'm kind of introverted, and just being in a city in LA where everything is so hustle and bustle, fast moving. I think I would just be really uncomfortable and just ended up being more lonely, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, were you, even in Copenhagen, maybe when you were younger, that kind of thing, were you always the sort of introverted guy? Was there ever a party version of you? You know what I mean?
I was such a big party guy from I think my entire 20s almost. I was club DJing bottle service type clubs here. So I was out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every single weekend. So there was not an inch of me that was introverted back then. It was just all party, all DJing, all fun. And yeah, I had FOMO if I didn't go out one night. So I was the complete opposite in my 20s. But as soon as 30 hit, it just, it flipped.
I mean, it happens, man. Priorities change. I think the real question is, because, I had that period in my life too, where I was DJing 4 or 5 nights a week, going out all the time. But for me, the real key is, would you go out even when you weren't DJing? Because for me, what I figured out about myself, and this is me looking back on younger me, but I was I liked going out in the sense of DJing because I was in control. There was some control of what was happening in the night. And then I would still go out to other nights, but looking back, I'm I never liked that as much as when I was, had some agency in the night.
I was the exact same way. I mean, especially towards the end of my club DJ career, I would only go out when I DJ'd. I wouldn't go out otherwise, but I really enjoyed the nights playing. It's also back then you had the passion of DJing before you got really good at producing. So everything was just all about the mixes. And I miss that kind of.
Dude, yeah, me too. I mean, I think people who listen to this podcast enough know, I'm a DJ at heart. Of course, I'm a producer as well. And, I do this podcast and a bunch of other stuff. But my identity is a DJ at its core. And there is something I was just talking to somebody about this, that in the modern like landscape of dance music, it's so producer focused. And I do think I see it's starting to shift a little bit back towards appreciation of like pure DJs. There's a few DJs out there who don't really produce, who are starting to get well known because of just how good they are at DJing and the interesting music they play and that kind of thing. And I don't know, I wouldn't mind seeing a little more of the balance come back that way.
Yeah, same. I just love seeing that. I remember like seeing DJs like Craze, who still like keeps it going with just playing other people's music, doing dope mixes. Like he produces himself, of course, but still like people like him who still pushes the DJing and pushes I don't necessarily need to have only my own music in my set. I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, of course, Craze. I mean, nobody's better than Craze.
He's probably the best example. Yeah.
yeah. He's the best DJ in the world. But yeah, no, there's a bunch, man. I mean, okay, wait. I have to ask before I forget, because you said you were playing at a bunch of like bottle service clubs in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
This is absolute ignorant American question, but I don't know why I'm curious. Is Danish bottle service different in any way from American bottle service? Like, what's the vibe in a Danish bottle service club?
It's I would say it's almost the same. There will still be your like horny dance music, your like douchey table like men, basically. But it's almost the same, to be honest, just on a smaller scale. Most of the big clubs here host like, I'll say they host like 500 people maximum. So it's a smaller scale.
Okay. But they still do the like big production, girls with the streamers, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the place where I was a booker and resident DJ back then had, they played the Star Wars theme every time people bought an expensive champagne. So the owner would always come up to me like, hey, somebody spot a bottle, put on the Star Wars thing. Then I had to like rewind and play the Star Wars theme. And it was just like, you do that 15 times in a night and you're just like, no.
Well, yeah, because of course that's going to break up the flow of the night. And yeah, that's hilarious.
And every time you did that, the whole dance floor would just stop.
Of course.
You can't dance to like the bro. Yeah.
Horrible. Dude, you know how I knew I was not meant to be a bottle service DJ? This was back in Chicago, and I was playing all over the city, all kinds of gigs. And I had one regular night that was at like one of the highest end bottle service clubs, where celebrities would go, that kind of thing. And I was fine. I was by no means their favorite DJ, but I did fine there. But I just remember one night, I was just thinking about this. One night I was there DJing. It was a late bar, so it was open till like 4 or 5 in the morning. And it was late. And one of the managers came into the booth and he was like, hey, Neo just walked in. Neo's here. And what that means, for anybody listening, what that means, the subtext of that is that you, DJ, need to start playing Neo's music so that we treat him well, right? But all he said to me was, hey, Neo's here. And all I said back to him was like, oh, cool. And then I didn't play any of his music. It's like, and then later on, I was like, oh, right. Yeah, this is probably not the job for me. Just not even. I
totally feel you. I've been in the exact same situation multiple times. There's some celebrity come in. I've also had a celebrity come up to me. I'm not going to name names, but someone who came up and like specifically told me not to play his music because he gets uncomfortable.
Right.
That's happened too.
I respect that actually, because that's,
same.
Yeah, I respect that. That's, drawing a boundary for yourself, making sure you have a good time. Because I mean, we do treat celebrities like animals, It's like they're not even humans.
Yeah.
Man.
So true.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, do you get in Copenhagen, were there a lot of celebs coming through?
What do you mean, like back then at the clubs?
Yeah, back then, I don't know. Like, I guess, actually, let me ask that question in a broader sense. Here's the actual question for you. Growing up in Copenhagen, what kind of culture were you absorbing? What was pop culture? What kind of stuff is on the radio? Like, is it a lot of imports? Like, is it a lot of American stuff coming over there? Or was it a lot of homegrown celebrity culture, music, that kind of thing?
Got it. Okay. That was a much better way to ask the question.
Yeah. It takes me a couple times.
I, I think it was a mix of both, a lot of American culture. I myself grew up on a lot of American culture because my mom was American. So I've kind of drawn into that. Primarily jazz, hip hop, soul, R&B in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I think most of the like pop culture here came from America, but maybe a bit later. And then all the local artists here, the most popular ones, just copied what America did. And that ended up being big here, which is pretty common around the world.
Yeah.
We also had some UK influence. Like I remember seeing old like Chase and Status, Rusko, all those guys early in Copenhagen because it was close to the London and the UK. So we got a lot of UK culture as well.
And I mean, what about dance music? How mainstream versus underground was dance music when you were growing up?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I mean, there was a very, very small niche of mainstream dance music in that like the Euro pop and all that dance 90s stuff was trending a little bit in like MTV and stuff. But underground never really happened in Denmark since we're such a small country. Most underground culture I knew of was from Berlin, London, Paris, other big cities in Europe. Yeah, pretty small exposure to like really real underground culture, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I believe that. I mean, I think that can be sort of a help and a hindrance in different ways when you're sort of growing up in like a little petri dish like that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I do remember later on in my teenage years when the internet was bigger. I remember a friend like exposing me to the whole Blockhouse era, blogs, SoundCloud, Beatport, all that stuff. And that's kind of the time where the internet was so big that you could like really dive into and learn about the culture through like YouTube and stuff. So that's when like the big exposure to underground and dance music culture happened. That was back then.
That's awesome. Well, so let me put a pin in that idea for a second, because something you just said made me want to talk about your new album for a second, which is talking about the explosion of the internet in terms of dance music. Like I assume you're referencing, you know, Bloghouse, and then from that comes sort of the SoundCloud era and the Hype Machine era and all of that. And so I was listening to your album DUSK, which by the time people hear this is out and it's great and everyone should go grab it. But listening to it, you cover a lot of ground on there. And the way I want to tie this in is I wanted to ask you, listening to it, to me, there's a certain amount that I got of nostalgia for that era of like the golden years of SoundCloud and Hype Machine. Not that you're sort of making like older styles of music, but it seemed like there was references to certain eras of that I just hadn't heard somebody making with like a modern flair in a while. And I don't know if that was intentional. I don't even know if what I'm saying is really true, but that's kind of what I got out of it. And I liked that aspect of it.
Thank you so much. That was very well put. And I take it as a compliment when you say that, because I think the sound of the album, the overarching sound of the album is like me taking everything I learned and experienced and listened to back then and just like putting it in a new format, I would say. Like taking all the ideas of flow, rhythm, bounce, sounds, all that, vocals from back then, and just like, I don't know, modernizing it a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy you say that.
Oh, that's great, man. Yeah, no, I'm glad I was somewhere on the mark there, because I think it's an interesting idea that oddly we don't do a lot. Because if you think about like the golden era of SoundCloud, when, you know, EDM trap music started becoming a thing, and from that spawned a bunch of other little subgenres, little niches. The sort of the charm of it at the time was that none of us were that good at making music at that time.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of like awesome DIY, like punk spirit to it, where a lot of the big tunes from back then, I mean, the mixing is bad, the production is questionable, but you know, there's this energy to it that carried it through, that made it such a wild movement. But yeah, it's a cool idea to think about going back to like, what was the actual idea? What was the spirit of that music? And, you know, I think of you as being, you know, a very top tier producer in terms of like sound design and engineering and all that sort of thing. People use your sample packs constantly. I think you're known for a high level of sonic quality. So it's cool to sort of take those ideas of like, oh, what was this fun thing we used to do? What would it sound like now that I know what I'm doing a little more?
Exactly. Thank you for that, by the way. That sparks two thoughts in my mind. One is, I know that the conversation of like the SoundCloud era in EDM has come up a lot on this podcast.
Yeah.
I remember Floss talking about it. I remember John Casey talked about a lot of cool people talked about it on here. And I think for me, what really resonates with that era was, one, I had no idea what I was doing back then. And two, the inspiration really came from hip hop.
Right.
And I remember hearing the Floss stuff, Mosh Pit, the Waka Flocka Feed stuff. And just like, because I grew up on hip hop, so it felt like familiar in a way, but it was just heavier. And I've always been like an EDM head and a house head as well. So that combo just like instantly clicked with me. And that's what I kind of tried to capture in this album, like having vocals on, having it feel like a verse more than a break, if you will.
Right.
And then just like having the grittiness of rap and hip hop and like trap. I think that's really what like inspired me by that like SoundCloud era and what I tried to bring back as well.
Well, it's a really good point. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me just tag that for a second. I think it's a really good point you make about the hip hop influence. And that is something that I think changed in the modern era kind of slowly over time. But it's a very good point, because I think a young kid just starting to make bass music right now oftentimes is going to go for like the heaviest, craziest drop of all time. And you make a really good point that the origins of this weird little subgenre we're talking about, that wasn't the point at the start of it. The point was much more about the groove and the rhythm and just like an unexpected combination of elements. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It's a good point. Yeah,
exactly. Which actually leads us into the second thing I was thinking about, which is that as a producer in this, I don't know if I want to call it niche, but in this area that I operate in, it's very, very easy to get caught up in just sounding like what's popular at the given time. And it's something that I've been guilty of so much over the years, like when John Casey popped out, when Liney popped out, when ISOXO popped out, when Noctu popped out, when Hamdi popped out last year, when drum and bass popped off in America recently. You see videos on socials, you see crowd reactions, and then you chase that sound, because with the tools available like Splice and good sample packs and preset packs, you can easily recreate sounds like that. Or you can just design it from scratch, but that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. But what I kind of want to say with that is that it's super easy with the tool sets we have available to just chase the popular sound as a producer and artist, which especially in EDM is something that's done a lot, which I've like been guilty of on so many occasions, trying to sound like somebody else. And I just like, when I made the album, I just finally sat down and just like tried as much as I could to put it aside and try to not have that ISO snare and not have that like Hamdi skank sound. And just like try to not follow other people's footsteps, which is really hard. I know some people have it easier with that, but for me, it's super hard. I don't know. I don't have a point with talking about it. It's just something that I've been guilty of much over the years, really overthinking the trendiness of sounds. And that's what I try to combat with this album, just trying to completely take that away from the conversation, from the creative mind, and just like create without thinking of what's trending, what's popular, what is going to get live support from Skrillex, that whole thing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a couple things in what you just said too. I'm a big comedy fan. I listen to a lot of comedian podcasts talking about similar stuff for their world. And that's something you hear over and over and over is comedians basically saying that they can't go out and watch too much comedy all the time, especially bigger comedians, because they'll end up just sort of automatically copying like their cadence and their style and point of view. And you just sort of subconsciously end up sounding like another comedian just because you went out and watched them a bunch of times and saw them having success. It's the exact same thing, I think, with this, where, even if you go play at a festival and you see somebody play a song and it crushes, and then immediately you're like, oh, well, why aren't I playing that song? I want that reaction. Yeah. And it's understandable, but it's also kind of a trap because, like you said, if you follow in their footsteps, you're always just kind of be like a shadow of them, It made me want to ask you, I mean, you were saying that over the years, you've sort of gone back and forth with like, what is my style? What is my sound? And again, I think of you as such a talented producer that I think you could make kind of whatever style you wanted to. You have the ability to do that. Has there been, has it crystallized in your mind in terms of like, this is my sound or this isn't my sound? Like, do you have a sense more so these days of like what your sound actually is?
Definitely. Yeah. And thank you for the kind words, by the way. I definitely think that it took me like almost 10 years to find a point where I'm like, okay, I have a sound, I have an identity in my music now. But I was like lost for like many years where I didn't necessarily have any specific sonic quality to my music that identified as, hey, that's a Fabian song. But I really feel like now I have that in the rhythm mostly, in that it is often atypical, more swung, funkier, I would say.
Yeah.
It has a bounce to it. That's probably the best way to put it. Which I hope resonates with the album as well, with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think there is something to, your particular bounce, your particular pocket of rhythm that you seem to fall into. I think that's identifiable. But the other thing I wrote down, I don't know if this resonates with you, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying about the hip hop roots of this subgenre versus sort of the heavier direction it's taken now. One thing I wrote down while I was listening to the album was that oftentimes you get to a point in a song where it's like you can either, it's like a fork in the road, and either you maybe the traditional route or the modern route is like going for the heaviest possible choice or the most explosive choice. And oftentimes I felt like on the album, you would end up going for sort of the deeper melodic choice, like an much more interesting choice that was, it's funny, as I'm talking about, I'm realizing that sort of the modern paradigm is you play a song and then at the drop, like you want everyone to go like, ooh, or like this surprise, this shock moment. And I think you've actually done that on this album, but it's by going the opposite direction. Like there were multiple moments where I sort of thought I knew that where the song was going. I was like, it's following this form. The big drop comes next. And then you would sort of switch it up, go the other way with, really interesting, like melodic choices, deeper choices. And I don't know, man, it's funny. I didn't put this together until now, but actually I think that part I found very refreshing as well.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm very happy to hear that, actually. But it comes back to the whole sound identity thing where a lot of the tracks sounded differently in the first demo version. You could almost say it sounded more generic. A lot of the drops mimicked other drops in popular trap EDM stuff. But then I just like flipped a lot of the songs and I would say made them more hip hop even, like added verses to some of them, added weird drops that are like almost just rap instrumentals, like similar to what Troy Boy does, for example, probably a good example to draw. In that the drop isn't necessarily like full on horn sounds and dubstep wobbles. It can be just a vibe and some drums and a cool rhythm.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of tried to do on the album.
Yeah. No, it's perfect, man. He's a great example too of someone who's able to still convey that energy. You know, it's not like listening to him is necessarily more mellow than listening to somebody making crazier drops. But yeah, it's just, you know, what tools do you use to achieve that feeling? For you, again, I mean, this is your first actual album, right?
Yeah. I've done the EDM thing where you just label hop and just release on every single electronic label in the world.
Yeah.
And just do a single everywhere. Sometimes I've done like a 4-track EP, but that's it.
Yeah. Which again, pluses and minuses, I've done the same thing. Is there a specific reason you wanted to do the album now? Did it just feel like it's time to do this? Like, what was the thought for doing it now?
Yeah, the thought started like a lot of us, I think, during COVID, where you just like reflect a bit more over your whole identity as an artist. That's when I started thinking of other directions and started to think maybe I should do a more cohesive body of work, and maybe I should not sign it to like a typical EDM label. And that's when the whole like idea started.
Where were you at career-wise, mentally, in general? Like, did it just sort of feel like it's time for let's change something up, let's try something different? Because I feel like you've been so consistent and you've been around for a long time. I mean, we're talking now about, you know, eras of dance music that are at this point, 10 plus years old. And I feel like,
exactly.
And you've been there the whole time, consistently putting out good work. Was there a feeling of just wanting to switch something up?
Yeah, most definitely. I think in general, just a feeling of doing something different, and also the curiosity of what would happen to my career if I dropped an album that sounded a tad bit different than what people are used to from me.
Right.
I think it's also that. Also, if we neglect to talk about the creativity part of it, the whole touring artist part of it, like I was hoping, or I'm still hoping, that an album can get me, I don't know if I would say branded, but like branded as a live artist, branded as someone who's more than just heavy EDM singles.
Right.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well, that was something else I wanted to ask you about in general, was the touring angle of it. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, I'm not saying any of this in a negative light, but I feel like your career has been an interesting path to watch from an outsider, because you're like the DJ's DJ or the producer's producer in a lot of ways, where I think everyone who does this knows your name, knows your music, knows how talented you are. Maybe, I don't know, is it being in Copenhagen? Is it like, I feel like there was never like just the touring apparatus side, at least in the States, was never this giant machine like it is for some. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Very well put. And it's honestly my biggest struggle to date, and has been for, I think, I want to say 5 years almost. Can't talk about the period during COVID, but still. And I've done a couple of like dissections of my brand on YouTube with videos where I talk about what my weak points are. And that specific thing, touring, just always end up being my weak point. I think it's a combination of different things. Because back in the day, I would say that my streaming numbers maybe weren't there, but they've been so for like 5 years. So I think it's interesting. It's probably a combination of, one, me being in Copenhagen, and my main market being America. That can be difficult because often you would get show offers for one show.
Right.
And it would just not be worth it to fly over for one show, both financially and crowd-wise.
Yeah.
And two, I think in the electronic space, it's been very focused around hype and focused on bringing what's trending to shows and to festivals. And I've like digging myself in a hole here, but I don't know if I've ever been that like trendy as an artist,
right?
Sound wise enough to like, hey, he's going to sell 800 tickets tonight in New York. I've never been there. So that's been a big struggle. And to further explain the story a little bit, I have gotten a booking agency in the US for the past 2 years now. We've been trying a few support tours, trying some headline shows, and the reality of it is that I still kind of can't break that market, even though streaming wise and fan wise on social media as well, I'm like the majority is from the US.
Right.
So it's a very strange correlation. It could also be with that I'm more like the producer's producer and not a lot of like fans of music buy tickets to shows. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a combination of so many things, man. And I realized once I said that producer's producer thing, sometimes that's used as like a negative thing. I want to make it clear to anybody listening, like that's meant to be that I think you are universally respected amongst producers. But
thank you. Also, it's important for me to clarify in terms or in regards to that the primary amount of money I earn and the things I make a living off is actually being a producer's producer.
True.
Like I earn 70% of my income from sample packs and sound design gigs. So producer's producer, I'll take it any day.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I mean, that's another huge part of what you do. Like you were just talking about, you made YouTube videos analyzing your own brand and sort of like opening up the machine and letting people see how it works. That's also a very rare thing. I mean, when did you start doing that, being more transparent with people, sort of opening up the process? Because not a lot of people do that.
I've done that since almost, I want to say since the beginning, but since 2015, I started doing YouTube vlogs every week. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I think I shut that down a couple of years ago, but I'm still active. I'm still doing like a video a month or something, but I've done the whole thing since COVID where I have bi-weekly live streams. I've done Discord. I have just a whole bunch of like things. I have my DMs open to everyone so people know that they can always DM if they have any production questions and stuff. Just like be more in touch with the producers. Also, just coming up as a producer, having that hand to grab when stuff got hard or when you had a question would be magnificent. I wish I had that. So I'm just trying to like give back to the community.
Well, it's beautiful, man. I wish I had that too when I was coming up. And not to mention, I mean, your sample packs, which, I mean, you have your own company for that at this point, right?
Yeah, I was on Splice at the beginning where I had my label there and did 20 something sample packs. But then in 2020, I went solo. Wanted to have more creative freedom. So I closed down the label on Splice and just starting my own label called Element.
This is another thing, too, that I think is worth highlighting is, we're talking about like things you're still working on about your own project and things that you want to improve. But I think it's also worth highlighting like the massive impact that you've had through something like all of your sample packs, which, I mean, everybody I know has used those sample packs, and it's like your DNA is imprinted in so many big songs in dance music at this point that, maybe your average person can't pick it out or doesn't have, the knowledge level to recognize when they hear those samples. But, that's in some ways, like, I'm not just saying this, but in some ways, I think that's you having a bigger effect on dance music than, somebody who's like the most famous DJ. You know what I mean?
I like that way of looking at it. Thank you. That's I'll take that any day.
Yeah, man.
It's always funny when you like, because when I'm making these samples, like for example, today I've done, I think 7 hours of vocal recording for samples. And it's not like when I'm making the samples, it's just, I don't know, it's work, it's fun. But like when you hear it in a track, it's something completely different. I remember last year, and this is a good story, but remember that big techno tune with the "I got that good stuff that you want"?
Oh yeah,
whispering vocal thing, the Creech track. That's my vocal, by the way, and that was super fun hearing like a left of center vocal sample being a song like that, and nobody knew it was me until I did a video explaining.
I didn't know that was
yeah,
you,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I did a video explaining that, and people were like, huh, interesting. You have your like strange samples in so many tracks. And that's like, it's super fun to have your fingers in that, especially given that as a producer, it can be hard to get placements and get like co-producing for bigger artists, which this was my way in.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, has been super, super interesting.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, another thing I was going to ask you, and this, I didn't know this or not. So I'm just curious. Have you been involved with ghost production over the years as well? I would assume you have been, but I didn't actually have any knowledge of it.
Yeah, I have. Not a lot, but a little bit. It's typically people later stages in the song process come to me with a skeleton for a track and like, hey, roof this up, produce this up, do some cool sound design, do some mixing, and pay me a fee for it. And yeah, I've done a little bit of that. Not like hundreds of tracks, but yeah, I've done it.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man. It's people who know this podcast, I mean, I've talked about ghost production stuff before. I don't really have any issues with it. I think it's cool, but I'm always curious, people's experiences with it. Because for me, I've done like just a tiny bit of it. It was fine. Yeah. It was cool. But, I'm curious, like your experience with it and how you view it. Because I think for what you do, it makes a lot of sense. Like I can see why people would come to you wanting that.
Yeah, I wish I had some better stories of me ghost producing for some like huge artists, but I actually don't. It would be also would probably break the disclosure thing of talking about it. But it would be super fun to have a good story with that, but I don't actually. But I'm hoping, especially given that my social media channels have like increased rapidly this year, I'm hoping that I'm getting some opportunities to do stuff like that. If not ghost and co-production, that would be even cooler, having my name on credits.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that would happen.
Did I see you did production for Kelly Rowland at some point?
I did that back in the day. I was signed to a publishing deal with Red Bull in LA. So I was practically living in LA back then, just producing for a whole bunch of people. Man. And the whole like going in session every day with songwriters and writing songs that you don't necessarily know who's going to sing the top line that we're doing. Very different way of working in music, but I've done that a lot too. Weird world, that whole thing.
Did you like
write
it?
Songs?
Because for me, I think about that world and I see why it would be interesting or exciting. It's, changing. It's always something different. But at the same time, for me, I don't know if it would fit the way I like to work that much.
I think I liked it for a couple of reasons. One, back then, I had a deal that basically paid me a monthly salary. So even though the songs wouldn't get placed to some big artists, I would still get a pay that could pay my rent and pay for my food. So I think being set in those regards really helped the whole experience be way more fun. But the whole thing of writing a song to someone you don't know who is and don't know if it's going to get placed because only like 1%, maybe even less of the songs you write gets placed, that was kind of, I don't know, not disheartening, but it was definitely a challenge mentally to still convince yourself that you're producing good stuff and convince yourself that you're going into that room because you have a specific skill set that like after a few weeks kind of start to like think it over a little bit, start to maybe doubt yourself a little bit. It's a very tough world. I admire the people who do that solely.
Dude, of course. Yeah, it's such a grind and it's a very specific skill too. I think you have to be, I admire those people in a way because it's like you have to be so open and so able to kind of lock into somebody else's idea quickly. And just like take direction and just run with it, which for me, that's not usually the way I work. Like for me, usually I'll have an idea maybe of something I want to do or a sound or something I want to explore. And, maybe I'll put something down right away, but just like a little demo. And for me, usually then I leave that alone. I let it kind of rattle around in my head for a couple weeks. And usually I can come back and then execute it the way I want. But
exactly.
But for me, man, needing to sort of just deliver immediately with something somebody else is telling me they want it's so impressive, but it's not really my skill set.
Yeah, it's a whole different skill set. It's so tough in that world. We just like need to create on the spot. You have like maybe an hour to get a demo done. That's intense.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It really
Probably not
is,
going
man.
back to that world.
Yeah. But okay, so for you, this is another thing I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about all of these different things you're doing, things you have done over the years. And I think one word that comes to mind when I think about your whole career is consistency. Like, you've always been there. You've always been making a lot of stuff, putting out a lot of stuff, whether it's songs, whether it's, YouTube tutorials or vlogs or sample packs. Like, you're very productive in general. And I wanted to ask you just like that energy, the energy to be so consistent, to always be putting things out without really taking significant breaks. Like, where does that energy come from? I mean, it's impressive that you're still able to sort of execute on that level this many years into it. You know what I mean? I think that's something not everybody has.
I think it stems from a bunch of different things. Mainly, I saw my mom when I was growing up. She's a percussionist. And she's turning 70 next year, and she's still touring way more than me.
Wow.
Out playing. Like, when I call her at midnight, she's still up in the studio just making rhythms and stuff. She's insane.
Wow.
I think seeing her all those years push through really sparked my mindset of, okay, you got to really work hard. You got to really be disciplined. You got to really do that if you want a career within music.
And she does jazz,
and then
right?
comes... Yeah, she does jazz. She used to play with Wayne Shorter, Miles Davis back in the day. So like jazz. Now she does more world experimental stuff, but still some jazz here and there.
Man, that's so cool, man. So cool. Yeah, I can only imagine.
So much.
I don't want to interrupt you for too long here, but just the idea of growing up, seeing her doing that. I assume you were able to, go see her at some shows, that kind of thing. Like, must just
I was on tour my whole childhood.
Oh, really? You were like living on tour sometimes?
Yeah, I was back at the tour bus, PlayStation or Game Boy, and just chilling.
Wow.
That was my whole life. Yeah.
Really? Oh, man, that's so interesting. I can't even imagine. How do you look back at that now? Because that's such a non-traditional childhood. Like, of course, obviously, it's incredible to have those experiences young, and of course, inspirational and so cool that your mom was doing it. Was there any part of like a quote unquote traditional childhood that you wished you had?
Yeah, there was. And I regret a couple of things from back then. One, mainly being that I didn't appreciate the music at all back then. Yeah. All I wanted to do, especially from growing up in Denmark, was play football, what you call soccer in America.
Right.
That's everything to young kids in Denmark, me included. And I just wanted to play soccer, be with my friends. But I don't know if I want to call it forced to go on tour, but sometimes I was. And it's like, I regret not appreciating the creative aspect of it, the art aspect of it, because being out on tour at such a young age with a mom who's playing big shows with untraditional music was like something I really wish I could relive again. But yes, with that being said, there was a completely traditional Danish upbringing in that my dad also is, he was a musician, he plays bass, but still it was like, we lived in the suburbs of Copenhagen. I grew up in a very traditional, like Danish neighborhood. So everything was very like traditional.
Right. So you got a little bit of both. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But the second thing I wanted to say with the whole discipline consistency thing is I've probably been like that for like 8 years, and it stems from beginning to have a regimen where you start your day by working out, which then builds into your day in the studio. And then just seeing the results of both the physical aspect of working out, but also the energy you have in the studio afterwards and the work you get to put in, and the results of that just kind of put me in some kind of hamster wheel. I don't know. I've done this for like 8 years, and just, I don't know. It's seeing the results of what you do and conceptualizing things. Like, for example, last year I started some series on social media where I would tell my audience that, hey, I'm posting a reel every Monday with a new remix. And just knowing that I have to deliver a new remix every Monday for 10 weeks, I don't know, it puts me in some sort of grind mode, which I cannot explain, but it's worked for me all these years and it still does. I honestly can't explain this.
No, I mean, it makes total sense, man. I think, you read anything about sort of the habits of effective people, and so much of it is, routines and just sort of like baking whatever you need to do into the fabric of your daily life. So it's not even a thought of how to do it. It's just like, oh, well, this is just how I operate, how I live. I think my only question, and that it makes total sense. I get why that works. Is it ever stressful for you is my question. Like, is it ever a bummer? Because I think there's certain personality types who thrive with that kind of thing. But for me, as someone who benefits hugely from routines, I do also hit points where I'm like, I'll get sick of it, even if it's working. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do that too. But with that being said, I really do thrive with deadlines and with commitment and discipline. But to be honest, right now is a very good example. I'm on season 3 of my remix series where I do a remix every week. So I'm on episode 29 right now. So I've done 29 remixes in the past, I don't know, half a year.
Wow.
Which at this point, I'm like 9 weeks into doing a new remix and mixing it and releasing it every week.
Crazy.
And I am just fed up.
Yeah.
Like I've hit the wall. Yeah. It's so tough. And I know maybe tomorrow I'll wake up with an idea for another remix and I'll just nail it in one day. But right now I'm really feeling the fatigue of that. But with that being said, I really do enjoy setting these time limits for yourself. Because when you're like in the zone and in the routine, it makes it a lot easier to deliver on that. Like if your life's a mess, definitely do not set time limits or deadlines to yourself. But if you're a structured, disciplined human being, I think it could really work. Also, while we're on that topic, The Power of Habit is a book that is very, very effective for stuff like that.
What is it?
Can't remember who wrote it.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I've heard that title. Are you able to summarize anything from that? Like, what do you use from that?
It's pretty much the stuff I just talked about, but simply put, having a structure, a routine with something that you do so much that it becomes habits and not work or something that you dread.
Right.
Is probably the main takeaway of that. Like going in the studio every day, blocking up your day, deadlines, stuff like that. Having to do that every day until it becomes a habit, and then it'll seem natural and it'll be much more fun. I know a lot of producers who I do a lot of like coaching calls and stuff, and a lot of producers are like, I didn't want to go into the studio today. I didn't feel creative. And what I always often tell them is, if you try to do it every day until it becomes a habit, you'll feel way more comfortable in that whole space.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, there's something about just doing it enough to where you stop even thinking about it. And yeah, my morning routine is very much that way at this point. It's great. Because you're a gym guy too, right? Yeah, for sure.
Every day?
I would say 5 to 6 days a week is about what I do.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's not
push,
like
pull legs, upper, lower. What are you on?
Man, I'm such a dummy with a lot of this because I don't really like. I have a routine but it's just I devised it. It's not really based on anything. So I'll do, I'll switch off days. I'll do like one that's more weights, one that's more cardio. Okay. And, like I switch it up. I don't, work the same muscle groups in a row, that kind of thing. But it's very unscientific. I feel like you have a much better routine.
I'm a nerd with that stuff. Yeah, it's I spent way too much time consuming studies, podcasts, all that stuff around like fitness and health. Such a big nerd. I don't know. I love that stuff when like you can build a program and see results from that. And like I have an app where I do all my workouts in, so I can type in volume amount. I can type in reps I did and see if I surpassed last week's. I love that stuff.
No, it's so cool, man. And I think if I did more of that and if I was a little more disciplined, I'd probably be in better shape, But for me at this point, I got to a point I'm happy with. And if I can kind of just maintain it, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
But
that's good.
Yeah. But you got to nerd out about something, man. I think that's the thing. For me, working out and being healthy in general, I do it at this point just because it helps my mental state.
Yeah.
But then I nerd out about other stuff, like I have plenty of nerdy interests and weird hobbies that I get super detailed with, like you're talking about you for fitness. And I think it's just, I don't know, you need a little bit of both,
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a healthy thing. It's about relationship. It's about balance. I think on that topic, every producer out there listening could benefit from some form of physical activity every day before the studio.
Yeah.
That's like, if you hate working out, just go for a long walk, or just go for a run or bike or ski or hike or whatever you live nearby.
Yeah.
That would really clear up your mind. Like, a lot of my best ideas for songs I've gotten while like being in the gym or being out on a walk or swimming or whatever.
Oh, dude. I mean, I've talked about this on the show before, but when you're engaged in physical activity and you really have to put a bunch of focus into it because it's hard, your brain sort of subconsciously in the background will solve creative problems for you. It's the craziest thing, like I'll get stuck on a song for a week and I can't crack it and I just hate myself. And then just one day at the gym, I'm sweating and I'm huffing and puffing. And then just all of a sudden, I know how to fix the song. And it's not any conscious thought.
Exactly.
It's the craziest thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so accurate. I get that totally too. Almost every day now.
Yeah. Wow. I wish I was getting every day. But that's, man, every time it happens, it's the best. I was just I saw Peekaboo over the weekend. He was telling me he's getting into like a workout routine now. And he was talking about the same thing, that just like, I think he's doing it at the end of his studio days, but he was saying it's almost like he'll sort of clear his head with that at the end of the day. And then he can kind of relax. And then the next day he feels refreshed. And I don't know. I agree that I think kind of everyone could benefit from something like that.
Yeah, that makes me so happy to hear. Also, just seeing all the big EDM DJs losing weight and posting about it on social media makes a lot of other producers get into working out, which I love seeing. So that makes me happy. Also hearing Peekaboo doing that stuff. It's great for everyone.
Yeah, 100%, man. Yeah.
More fitness.
No, yeah.
I've also, on that topic, I've had this idea for so many years. If anyone listening wants to help me with it, I really want to do this. A gym and bass tour where I tour with a couple of other artists. And in each city, we, with the fans, hit the gym before the show. And then we go to the show together. So it's like a gym meetup thing and a show concert thing at night. I really want to pull this off. I've been talking about it for years.
You could totally, there's enough gym heads, especially in bass music. You could absolutely make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. I really want to make that happen. I could really see it just also on a personal level, connecting with people over fitness. Would love that.
Yeah, it's a great idea too for like even on a business level for fan connections and that sort of thing. It's a little more meaningful than kind of just like a meet and greet where you just get together in a room,
Those are always so awkward. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. No, that's cool, man. Yeah. Well, how did you, as we're kind of bringing it home here, we've talked about all these different things you do, your commitment to them, where the drive comes from. But I haven't actually asked you, how did you get good at making music? Because I think hearing that you grew up with musician parents, I'm sure you have sort of an innate sense of music. Probably your sense of taste developed earlier, style developed a little earlier. But actually learning how to get good at making music is a whole different thing that I have to imagine you also put a ton of time into.
Yeah, I definitely did. And it kind of stems back to the whole discipline discussion we just had. But I think it's a matter of the 10,000 hours thing. Just being in the studio every day, working hard. Like, I went to university while I was learning to produce back then, 10, 11, 12 years ago. And just like every night I would spend in the studio working on music, getting good, watching YouTube tutorials, reverse engineering presets in Serum and Massive and all that. And just like really spending the time getting good at producing. And if you want to hear my sound or my skill set develop over the years, if you just search like Fabian Mazur 2012 on Google, I think some super old, horrible songs will pop up. And you can essentially hear how bad I was in the beginning and just like follow along the the evolution of my technicalities and my sound. But it comes back to the whole 10,000 hours thing, just doing it every day for many years, getting really good at it, studying other people, YouTube tutorials, like every day.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably what my answer is.
That makes total sense. I guess my question is, at the start of that, when you really started getting serious about the learning process of it, were you looking at music as the career? Like, was this you trying to get ready to apply for the job, if you know what I mean?
Not at all. It wasn't at all. I think from my teenage years, I always knew that music was going to be in my life in some way. But I was very fortunate in that when I started to learn how to produce, I was making money from DJing on the side. So I didn't necessarily think of the producing as something that I need to have a monetary benefit from. I don't know. It came from the whole mom and dad thing.
Just felt natural.
Unavoidably. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't know. It just came back then, and I just spent a lot of time in my mom's version of Logic on her computer. Yeah.
Were you working side jobs? Like, where was the money coming from early on?
DJing.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that was
like
me
from
too.
Very early on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I borrowed like $1,000 from my mom back then and bought a pair of speakers and the like CDJ, I think it was called 400.
Yeah. I remember those.
Yeah. With the smallest DJM mixer you can get. And I went just like playing birthday parties every weekend.
Man.
For a couple $100.
I love it.
Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah. They really were, man. There's something, it builds character, those kind of gigs.
Yeah, true. Also, now you know the BPM of every song made since 1990.
Yeah, also true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny, man. Well, man, I mean, there's a lot more we could talk about, but at this point, I mean, is there anything we haven't touched on? Anything else about the album? Anything else you're working on, you're excited about, you want to get out there?
I do have a bunch of projects in the work. One is a collab project, which is actually going to be a duo with another Danish fellow producer that I can't at the current time give the name of, but it's premiering this summer and it's a project that we've worked on for many years. So very excited to premiere that. Can't announce it yet, but it's definitely something people should take note of. And then besides that, we really appreciate it if you go listen to my album. If you are a hip hop head, you will love the album. If you're an EDM head, maybe you will not love the album. Give it a listen anyway. And yeah, feel free to shoot me a DM on any social media if you have any questions whatsoever. They are always open, like I say.
I love that, man. And I don't know. I think you're selling yourself short. I mean, I feel like a lot of EDM fans will find a lot to like in the album, too. I think it does a really good job.
I hope that, yeah.
Bridging the gap.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Also, we got to do a quick back-to-back shout-out because I've listened to this podcast religiously for, I think, 6, maybe 7 years.
Oh, man. I mean, that's day one. 7 years is about when I started.
Yeah, I still remember some of the early ones. I can't remember the specific episode, but a friend sent me. And I've been listening ever since. So, dude, doing a great job. I love that you kept it going for all these years. It's a tremendous source for up-and-coming producers like me to be able to listen to our idols and just hear more behind the actual artist than just, hey, so what's going on? Where are you playing? Blah, blah, blah. It's like actually getting to know the persons, and that's highly appreciated.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. That means a lot. Yeah, super meaningful hearing that from you. I'm very appreciative you've been listening that long. And yeah, I don't know, man. It's been a cool thing. I feel the same way about you, honestly. I think there's very few people out there who are providing resources in the way that you are. Like we were talking about earlier, the YouTube videos, kind of just opening up the hood, showing the engine, showing how it works. Not to mention, of course, all the sample packs and just actual, physical tools you're giving people. But it's a rare thing, man. And I think it's not only like a laudable thing. It's not only just a cool thing that you're doing that I think makes you a good person, but also the fact that you've been able to give back And by doing so, sort of find a career for yourself in that. I mean, that to me, what could be more inspirational than that, man? It's so cool what you're doing.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. That really means a lot.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. And thank you for doing this, man. It's long overdue. I was excited when you hit me up.
Yes, same. I've been thinking about it for so many years. So I'm super happy to have been here now.
Hell yeah. Well, man, we'll come back. We'll do this again down the road. But I think for now, maybe I'll just wrap it up by asking you the last question. Quick thing. If you listen to the show, you may know what it is, but it's just looking for like a memory or a moment from your life. Random access, kind of the first thing you think of where in that memory, you just had a deep connection, a deep interaction with music. Something that left an impression on you. Maybe it's a memory you think about from time to time. Maybe it's tied to, a moment. Whatever it is, doesn't have to be a good story. Kind of just the first thing you think of.
I have a very specific moment in mind. I want to say it's 6 or 7 years ago. So I was just started doing music professionally and making income from producing. And I saw a concert with my mom where she had a percussion solo. And it hit me in that moment that all of her rhythm and all of her passion for rhythm and music and instruments and that, I saw myself in her, and her syncopation and her rhythm when she played that percussion. I just had a moment where I reflected on my whole journey as a producer and everything all the sounds I've made just stem from her. And that moment was just super special because I've kind of neglected in my early years that I want anything to do with the whole jazz, percussion world, weird stuff that my parents were doing. But that moment was just bam, everything you do in music stems from that woman right up there on stage. And that was a very special moment for me.
That's so, yeah. I love that story, man. That's so cool. And a good reminder too, I think, for creativity in general that, I don't know, there's something very reassuring in that of, we talked a little bit in this conversation of producers trying to find their sound and figure out who they are. And there's kind of a comforting idea in that of oh, you're already there. You're already you already have your sound. Maybe you don't consciously know it all the time, but it's already there. It's not something you have to, find and discover. It's more about kind of an internal journey. I don't know. There's something it's we're all already there. That's a really nice idea.
Yeah, exactly. I love the idea of it not necessarily being conscious, but what you're already making is has an identity.
And
even if you're
the
just
fact,
putting a few sounds together,
dude, and the fact that this comes totally full circle. We started off this conversation talking about how it's easy to copy other people, and that can feel like a trap sometimes. But again, there's that if you can find that inner confidence of no one else could sound like you because nobody else, only you and I guess whatever siblings you may or may not have has your mom, nobody else could possibly have those genetics. And it's nobody else could ever be like you, and you can't ever be like anybody else because, it's just a fact.
Exactly.
You're unique.
And it doesn't even have to be my mom. It could be someone else, and their background of what music they listen to growing up makes them.
Yeah.
So they are unique in that sense.
Yeah. Nobody's lived your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that.
Good way to end it.
Yeah. That's a great way to end it, is that kind of everyone should be confident at the end of the day because, no matter how lost you might feel at certain points or how much you might feel like you haven't figured it out yet, it's no, actually, you are unique as anybody else. And it's kind of just a matter of chiseling that out of, whatever that block of stone is.
Exactly. It kind of reminds me of the thing that Skrillex said when he got the Grammy, which by now would have been a few weeks ago.
Right.
But he said something in that specific realm, that success is not something that I can't remember the specific quote, but something about success and then not chasing success. It's kind of similar to the thing we just talked about.
Yeah. It was like I did see that video. It was like, you can't chase success. You can only attract it. Something like that.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And which is absolutely right. And it's the classic thing of like it's even like the job interview thing. It's like the more you act like you don't need the job, the more likely it is that you'll probably be offered the job, you know?
True, yeah.
Oh, man. Well, this is great. What a great way to end it, man. Thank you for doing this, dude. I'm glad we finally did it.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And definitely not the last time. And let's be in touch. Let's keep it going.
Let's definitely do it. Thanks,
Awesome.
man.
Thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you later.
See you.
All right, man.
Bye.
Peace.